Welcome to Payments Unfiltered, powered by Primer. I'm your host, Theo Spyridis, Head of Product at Primer. Today I'm joined by Jeff Otto, Chief Marketing Officer at Riskified, a leading fraud prevention provider. Jeff has held leadership roles at Marqeta, Salesforce, Morgan Stanley, and Merrill Lynch. And in this episode, we dig into agentic commerce. We look at how AI-powered shopping agents could fundamentally change how transactions are initiated, approved, and disputed. We explore what that means for fraud prevention, where new forms of risk may emerge, and why merchants could soon face exposure they're not yet accounting for, from chargeback liability and data leakage to coordinated policy abuse. Let's dive into the conversation. Well, welcome, Jeff. Thanks so much for joining us. Maybe to start off, you could just give everyone an introduction into who you are and maybe your current role as well.
Yeah, Theo, thanks for having me on the show. Jeff Otto, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Riskified. Background, I've been in financial services, fintech, and e-commerce enablement for the last 22 years. Been at Riskified for about 3 years. And, a simple way to think about what we do is we are using a lot of data, about 500 billion orders in the last 4 years, to decision on orders at checkout. So all the big merchants across the world, they use us to help them drive higher growth rates, make sure every customer gets the right decision, and we block out the fraudsters.
Awesome. And today we're going to be talking about agentic commerce and the impact that agentic commerce can have on fraud. And I'd love to kind of pick your brain on all of these various topics associated. So maybe to start us off, let's not assume anything. Maybe you can tell us from your view, what is agentic commerce?
This is software becoming the customer, in simple terms, right? What we're talking about here is, a AI agent that is being trained to know you, to understand you, to get what sizes you like, what preferences you have, what music tickets or concert tickets you want to buy. And over time, we're going to see more and more empowerment of these agents to make purchasing decisions based on the intent that you give them. Right now, we're in the early stages. We're in the first phase, right? It's the assistant phase. And it's all about, large language models, and you're asking them prompts around, hey, help me figure out, I got to solve this problem, help me figure it out. And they're giving you very nicely curated, maybe product offerings, right? And kind of giving you, all right, now you can link out and go buy that on the merchant's site. That's kind of phase one. And what we're starting to see as this evolves is more of a true agentic shopping experience where that agent is saying, you know what, I'm going to go a step further. You want me to buy this for you, and here are the terms and conditions, etc. If you trust me with your payment method, I'll go and I'll do this on your behalf. And then kind of the final state, which, we're all super excited about this because, the fully delegated world that we can all see on the horizon is a world in which, your busy life, you've got this sidekick, right? This agent that is doing all of these things for you, that's entrusted with your identity, with your payment methods, knows your intent, and knows your life situation, and can do more and more of those activities for you. In particular, the easiest use cases is e-commerce, purchasing, but you can get more advanced things like getting into financial services and, hey, help me rebalance my portfolio. Like there's there's a huge opportunity as these capabilities mature and move into other industries and services.
So a lot of very exciting technology that's going to make all of our lives easier as consumers. Now, you mentioned 3 stages to that journey, and I think you said today we're at this kind of assistant journey. It's helping me in my kind of, maybe I call it my browsing experience, helping me identify what product I want to purchase. But once my intent is there, then I'm kind of being redirected to the merchant's website and kind of executing my payment journey there. If we start there, do you think that's having an impact on fraud, or do you think it's as soon as this agent starts to be involved in that payment journey that the kind of landscape of fraud is going to start being impacted by this new technology?
Yeah. So, it's a question that requires us to take a couple layers. We got to dig in on this one. So it's a good question. Um, the short answer is the way that certain new protocols have been developed, and I'm gonna pick on Agentic Commerce Protocol, which is OpenAI and Stripe's new protocol, is they went out to market very quickly with this, and they are creating a great experience for shoppers. But to be honest, a lot of the very important signal that determines whether this is a good actor or a bad actor is missing. In fact, if you think about, the typical payload that a mature fraud and risk intelligence platform uses, we're getting things like we're detecting whether or not the user is using a proxy server. We're doing, fingerprinting the device data. We've got, IP and geo features and other machine learning features that are really testing the security of that IP address. We're looking at card details and we're linking that across. And a lot of that data is not being passed through in the instant checkout process. And what the result is you're losing, somewhere around a third of the signal that most platforms use to make informed decisions. Make sure that the good customers get approved and the bad, fraudsters get denied, right? That's the surgical precision you want to get to on every single order. And what they've done is they've rushed the protocol out a little bit, and in its current state, it's missing that. And I'll tell you, Theo, we've tested this. We have red team folks over here at Riskified that actually create synthetic IDs and run orders through. And we did a side by side with one of their early merchant partners, and did the instant checkout through ChatGPT. We're able to put through an order that had a fake email address that had been newly created, an incorrect billing address. We used a VPN to shift the IP, and the order was approved. We then went to that merchant's website with a similar synthetic order, and not only was that order declined, the account was blocked. So you could see just through this testing the difference in security in the current state of this new agentic commerce protocol versus the more mature storefront that merchant had. So, those are things we're considering. But, it's not just OpenAI. There's other protocols that are being developed. I'm quite impressed by what the team at Google has done with AP2 and the thoughtfulness that they've kind of brought in on that new protocol. And what we're excited about is there's some great working groups. They've got a risk working group that they're kicking off. And that's an opportunity for the ecosystem to come together and say, look, got this exciting new channel. Everybody wants this, right? This is consumer capabilities everybody wants. We've got to make sure it's set up in a way where we're going to protect it, so we're not going to hurt these small businesses that end up using the channel.
That's fascinating that you had a red team go and simulate all of this and actually be able to talk to evidence rather than it just being theory. I find so much discourse around agentic commerce being on theory, so it's very refreshing to hear the evidence-based approach that you and your team have taken. So I think what you're saying, if I try and play it back to you, is actually if I'm a merchant and I play in this space today, I'm exposing myself to risk. So what would you advise a merchant to do? Should I play in this space? Should I wait but risk that I'm going to be late to the party? Should I, how should I navigate this or start building my mental model around this and especially on my kind of risk portfolio that I'm willing to take on board?
Yeah. So, the first thing is, I think it's very prudent for merchants to be testing, sandboxing, figuring out, how can they turn on these new avenues of growth? This new channel is very exciting. And you don't want to ignore it, right? But I would approach it with thoughtfulness, I would ask good questions of the partnership, right? Depending on which protocol you engage with or which orders you want to decision upon. And that requires you to have some identity aware infrastructure. Like you want to be able to detect, is somebody a human, or is this an agent, or is this a malicious bot? kind of like being able to tell the difference between the three is important. There's some great players out there that can get you perimeter defense on that. And then at checkout, you just want to be very clear in understanding what data, what signal are you getting passed through to you? And what can you pass on then to if you have a third party, fraud and risk intelligence provider, or you're doing it in-house, how do you want to treat those cohort of orders? Just to make sure that, you don't end up in a situation where you're being attacked. Again, fraud attacks, I mean, and the velocity of fraud attacks, are impressively fast these days. You think the bad guys are the early adopters on AI too. So they're using tools to, card test and, they're using agents on their side to like make things run faster. So you gotta protect yourself there. One of the things we found that you might find interesting is the similar team that we have that's doing the red team work, but we also have an insights team that goes out and looks for emerging threats. Either it's clear web or dark web, marketplace sites, fraud community sites, and things like that. And one of the examples that one of my colleagues found recently was it was a emergent, not one of the big players, but it was an emerging, AI shopping platform, if you want to call it that. And it had kind of two ways to check out. You could, it would get curate, a product based on your prompt and whatever. And you could say, all right, shop now, which would direct you out to the retailer's site, right? And that's, that security setup is actually not that different than what we have today. It's kind of an LLM, shopping assistant kind of approach. But the other one they had was, okay, go ahead and buy with our shopping agent. And that approach, a fraudster took the time to write out a detailed blog post of how to exploit that situation, step by step, screenshots, examples of orders that they had put through. And basically that's out there on this, this clear website called Black Bones, which has a bunch of, I can't believe they haven't shut the site down yet, but has a bunch of these types of things out there and was exploiting this. So, imagine scenarios in the future where, you're talking about ChatGPT with 800 million monthly active users. You've got Gemini that's like 650 million. And like when you're getting to that type of scale and then you start seeing volumes, like we got to be prudent here. We got to make sure that we're not, ingesting a whole bunch of fraudulent orders.
So what I take away from that is tread with caution and
Yeah.
go in with your eyes wide open, which I think is very great advice. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that. You also talk around like a lot of protocols. Um, as a merchant, like, am I gonna have to reason about every protocol? Am I gonna have to now have even more fragmentation that I need to try and think about? Like, do you have any kind of insights or thoughts there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, the look, the space is evolving so fast. I just, we were talking to our customer advisory board and, yeah, these are like a group of a dozen or so of the largest merchants in the world. And we swap notes on this evolving landscape. We share our insights with them. They share what they're seeing and what they're testing with. And I tell you, every time we get together and, it's fairly frequently, like the landscape has changed insanely, right? I mean, this stuff is moving so fast. And of course, you've got, agentic commerce protocol, which I talked about earlier. You've got the agent payments protocol, which is what Google is doing. You've got, Visa intelligent commerce. You've got MasterCard's agent pay. So there's a lot of players. There's a lot of kind of emerging protocols and ways of doing this that are evolving. And then you got, a lot of skunkwork projects that we probably don't know about, where there's other things happening and maybe even smaller players like Skyfire, et cetera. I think having a team that, wakes up every day, depending on the size of your shop, but having a team that's kind of waking up every day and looking at these new channels holistically, right? Putting together a really capable payments leader, somebody from the fraud team, somebody from the e-commerce team, and creating a little SWAT team to go and test out the sandbox, I think is not a bad idea. I think that's what we would guide everybody to do. You want to understand what the possibilities are down the road with this, because I think it's a very logical conclusion that a good chunk of e-commerce is going to move to this. And in fact, I
Mhm.
think McKinsey estimated something like 3 trillion by, I don't know, 2030, right? So I think they have some stats out there around what the type of adoption that they're going to see. And, again, they could be, they could be slightly wrong, or maybe they're being too conservative. Who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting one around the pace of adoption of velocity. I remember back in the day, when these AI agents and ChatGPT and the first models were launched, the pace that they were able to kind of develop from like the first 80% was incredible. But there's always that last 20% that doesn't continue on that linear curve. And it is almost like an efficient frontier that is even harder to find that kind of incremental progress. I think agentic commerce, you're absolutely right to call it out. So many protocols, so much R&D, and definitely some initial use cases that have gone to market. But also, I think a lot of merchants are left wondering, what is my role to play here? How do I understand what to do? You've talked around like the increase in exposure to fraud that's just been thrusted on merchants and trying to figure out how to navigate this. I think it'll be very interesting to kind of see how it unwinds. Do you foresee like do you have any kind of beliefs around like maybe some merchants opting out? The one that obviously comes to mind because it was recently in the news is Amazon and Perplexity, and Amazon now suing Perplexity because of the kind of risks associated with their flows. So, yeah, do you have any kind of thoughts or hot takes on
Yeah.
any merchants choosing to kind of opt out of this due to the kind of risk exposure increase?
Yeah, fascinating to see the lawsuit against Perplexity coming from Amazon. If you visualize this as like, there's three paths, right? A couple forks in the road, directions of this could go in, right? You have on one end, you have a very call it LLM centric future where a lot of this is controlled, and the protocols, et cetera, and how it's done is driven by the open AIs and the Geminis and the Anthropics, et cetera. And that, puts a lot of tension. I think if I was a merchant, what I would be worried about in that scenario is, the loss of reputation, the loss of brand trust, the loss of loyalty that you have when you've been separated from your loyal consumer. And, brands don't want that, right? They want to create experiences and loyalty that bring people back and keep them purchasing with them on an ongoing basis. So that's one path, right? There's a middle road of compromise. And again, I mentioned, Google AP2, where, a protocol that's been well thought out, working groups in the ecosystem, trying to enable this new agentic commerce channel in a way that is both elegant for the consumer and with the right security to protect the merchant. And that's, kind of a middle road, right? And as that evolves, I think that's a great way to do it. And then there's the let's call it the third way, the very merchant centric, or merchant power approach, which is the Amazon side of it. Amazon saying, "Hey, Perplexity, you can't do this on our site. We're going to sue you, et cetera." At the same time, Amazon, at their size and scale, has ruled out Rufus, and some of the quick results that came out after Black Friday, Cyber Monday, was that the consumers that were engaging with Rufus, which is Amazon's, AI shopping agent, were converting at an order of magnitude higher than consumers that weren't using it. So right there, what you're seeing is that, if I were another large e-commerce merchant, I'd be looking at what Amazon just accomplished and saying, wow, I really should probably be thinking about my roadmap, and I should be thinking about a merchant-centric AI shopping assistant experience that I can control, where I can feed it into my product catalog and the loyalty, and understand based on the consumer that shows up what types of offers and terms that I want to give, and what's the opportunity to give them the next product that they like based on what I know about them, and the opportunity to use my existing fraud and risk intelligence tech stack, whether it's in-house or third party, to make the right decisions around those orders. So, it's kind of, that merchant centric path is definitely one that when we talk to merchants, we say, hey, we think it's not a bad idea to maybe take a look at Rufus.
And I guess that applies if you're large enough, right? And I think that's a very interesting kind of opportunity where you have these merchants that want to own the shopping experience. They kind of see that shopping experience as a USP, right? In the same way that people go to so much effort to make a world-class in-store shopping experience. I think
Yeah.
it's no doubt that merchants have invested so much in a best-in-class online shopping experience. And you're right, an agentic experience makes a lot of sense, especially if that's the trend that consumers are kind of exploring. So you talked around data and the drop off of data. I'd love to maybe dive into that a little bit more. So I think you mentioned that about a third of the data is dropped off in these kind of current agentic flows that are live versus kind of the kind of, let's call it traditional kind of shopping channels. Um, you obviously built these amazing machine learning algorithms and they're tuned on all of this data and you're able to make these incredible kind of predictions and preventions around fraud. How are you as a kind of fraud company or fraud prevention company thinking about like navigating this space? Is it retraining models, advising so that the right data is passed through? Like, is there a way that you kind of assimilate to this new world of less data, or is the answer let's get back to the data depth that we were getting in the past?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's a multi-pronged approach, to be honest. I think on the influencing front, it's important. We spend a bit of time, have the conversations with OpenAI, having the conversations with Mark and the Google AP2 team, and other players that are in the space to just try to help them see this through our lens, right? See this through the massive identity graph and again, like I mentioned, 500 billion, in GMV volume that we've decisioned on in the last few years, like, because, we can see, again, a lot of the trends here, and we can see potentially a future where, if we don't fix some of these data gaps, the bad guys are going to find it out and they're going to realize that they can take advantage. And so we want to prevent that future. And at the same time, investing in our R&D around this space. We have a very large R&D team, since we're a public company, and a very large data science team, and we're always surfacing and training machine learning features based on data elements, based on industry, based on geography, all kinds of different vectors on that to get better and more precise decisioning. And so, uncovering like, all right, what are some other signals that we can get? What do we need from the various protocol providers to, kind of like minimum viable decision that we can get from them. So I think it's interesting. And then of course, we're talking with a lot of our merchants and we're engaged with them on some of their early pilots. It's usually some of the bigger players that are doing this right now, where they are figuring out, all right, maybe they want to build out a merchant kind of controlled shopping agent experience, and we're advising them on how to best secure them.
Multi-pronged approach sounds very sensible. Again, some great advice. The element that people sometimes might not be aware of when you kind of work with companies that help you kind of prevent fraud is also the distribution of liability sometimes. One of the things I'm very fascinated by is we now have a new party in the flow, an AI agent, usually either owned by a third party or maybe in Amazon's case, they might even own themselves, but they'd be using an underlying LLM nonetheless, likely. Who owns the risk when a transaction is initiated by an agent, but it turns out to be fraudulent? Have we figured out an answer to that question yet?
Man, it depends on payment method. It depends on whether they're using, tokenized wallet. The way I like to reframe that question is, we got to think about total conversion here. So let's say that, you say, I don't have to worry about this. They're going to use Apple Pay. It'll just flow through to the issuer. Well, the issuer has a liability and they're more blind than even the merchant is. What are they going to do? What's that auth rate going to look like, right? So we have to be very careful when we think about this picture, because even just shifting of liability, using tokenized payments, et cetera, the issuer has a decision to do as well on their side. And we want is to collaborate as an ecosystem to drive payment success, right? Drive e-commerce growth. This is a new channel. It's exciting. This is a way to do that. But we have to think about it comprehensively. And even if there's a liability shift from merchant to issuer, still like someone has to accept that liability. And if we have the right data across that entire flow, then we're going to have more payment success.
Makes sense. Okay, so agentic commerce, a when, not an if. A long journey that we're all going to be going on whilst this exciting technology figures out the best path, but lots of risks and threats potentially to merchants and how they operate and scale. What practical steps can fraud and payment leaders take today to prepare for this shift and for this journey? And how should business leaders also be thinking about payments and fraud as a strategic lever within their organization?
Yeah. All right. So a couple practical things that I advise our merchant customers to do. One, as I mentioned earlier, get the SWAT team going on this, capable payment leader, somebody from the fraud and risk intelligence team, somebody from the e-commerce team, and start playing around the sandbox, with some of the protocols, start playing around to see, what could your e-commerce product team do in terms of, hey, if we want to do a merchant, kind of merchant owned agent shopping experience, what could that look like? What data would we need from the product catalog? What data would we need from the customer data platform, the CDP, in order to make that successful, right? So that's kind of one practical thing. Second, I would get in the conversation, with your peers. Try to again use organizations like MRC, NRF, et cetera, to like get into these conversations, learn from one another, see what's working. I always advise that. And I think that's a really great thing. Learn from the peers, learn from the front runners. But the thing not to do is to sit and wait too long, because this is moving fast.
Dive very head in the sand and collaborate, I think is excellent advice. One of the things I actually love about the kind of community in fraud and payments is this notion of frenemies. And sometimes you can compete, but sometimes you can collaborate. And I feel that always that fraud specifically is an industry where collective minds outweigh those by themselves. So yeah, stellar advice. And I would definitely agree to that. Okay, so Jeff, to finish off, I'm going to ask you to get your crystal ball out. 2 years, 3 years time, if we think about the bull case or the best case scenario for agentic commerce, what does that look like in 2 to 3 years time, in your opinion?
All right, I'm going to give you a bright, exciting future, and
Please do it.
I'm going to give you a terrifying downside.
That was going to be my next question. So amazing.
Okay, so and to try not to be redundant, but you look at some of the brain trust from the McKinseys and BCGs of the world, and they're taking out their crystal ball and they're looking at, all right, what's the size of the opportunity here? And within a very short period of time of 3 to 5 years, they're saying we're talking about trillions of dollars of volume that could be going through these agentic shopping experiences. And they're looking at it not just through e-commerce, like agents that are helping out, like I mentioned at the top of the call, with financial services, portfolio rebalancing, money movement, like optimizing the yield across. These are all things that are unoptimized today because we just don't have the time. Like we're busy. But man, boy, if you've got a 24/7, 365, AI agent sidekick helping you out, it kind of opens up the door to all kinds of optimization that doesn't exist today. Now you think about banks that, are reliant on people being a bit lazy and not optimizing their own cash management, and how that could change. I mean, wow, that could be huge for the banking industry. Anyway, So the exciting future is, maybe our money is growing faster. Maybe we're getting the best possible deal on the products and services that we need because our AI agent sidekick is doing that for us. And we're able to operate and make decisions or delegate decisions in such convenient ways that it frees up more of our time to do the things that we're passionate about, the things that we love. So I think that's a very bright future, and this could be huge. On the merchant side, you're talking about revenue growth, you're talking about e-commerce growth, you're talking about, again, like think of the conversion rate that I told the Rufus story from Black Friday, Cyber Monday. My goodness, how many times have you stopped a purchase interaction because you're like, you know what? I'm not sure. I want more time to think about this. I need to think, am I buying the right product or not? Then if that agent makes you a crystal clear, compelling, you know, business case for making that purchase, you're going to convert more, right? And that's more revenue for the merchants. So that's exciting, both on the consumer side and the merchant side. The terrifying dark side, to be an alarmist for a moment, is, I follow pretty closely, the growth over the last 5 years of what the economists call scamming, and that is basically organized crime, mostly out of Southeast Asia, but in pockets around the world that have been exploiting, people stealing, romance scams, crypto scams, identity theft, obviously very sophisticated spear phishing, to steal account information, credit cards, bank account, etc. And, there's estimates of this being, in excess of 200 billion dollar a year wealth transfer that's happening, especially on, some of the victims that are losing like life savings and things like that. But we see it downstream. We see it when our teams go out onto the dark web and the clear web, and we see all of these compromised identities being resold, right? We see the marketplace data, the cards, the bank accounts, etc. Now, a lot of scamming has been powered by human labor, often human trafficked labor. And there's some really fascinating groups, Operation Shamrock, that are bringing light to all of that. And that human labor is basically just sitting in what looks like a contact center, just scamming people all day or trying to spearfish them, right? Now, I want you to imagine a world in which open source, AI agent models and other technology is available. I mean, the infinite scalability of that tech to do the same thing, but more effectively and using, AI to do it is a truly terrifying world. So identity security is going to be paramount in the future to make sure that we don't have a world where more of this, wealth transfer is happening, where money is being stolen out of our economy, out of our bank accounts, by more sophisticated AI-powered criminal organizations.
Well, I don't know if I should be more terrified or excited, but I certainly feel both after looking into a crystal ball.
Sorry to close it on such a bummer.
No.
It keeps me up.
I think there are real threats to this technology, and I think it's important to be talking about them, but that also doesn't nullify how innovative the technology is and the opportunity it has. And I think with any great technology, you approach it with caution and you make sure you maximize the upside and you mitigate the downside, and don't be naive. And there are fraudsters out there that are using this technology even before the consumer is. So I think it's a very fitting way to end the podcast. And Jeff, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on and sharing all of your insights. It's been super, super fascinating. So yeah, thanks a lot and take care.
Thanks, Theo. Cheers.
It was great to have Jeff join us on the podcast today and share his thoughts and insights on agentic commerce. There's no doubt that this is a really exciting space that will transform the customer shopping experience. And yes, there's been a lot of hype behind it. But I think it's also clear we're still early on the journey, and there's going to be lots of new risks that arise, and these have to be addressed in order to scale the adoption. If you enjoyed this episode, there's plenty more conversations with people building, operating, and reimagining payments across the ecosystem. You can find Payments Unfiltered on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll see you next time.